My name is Nadia Kowalski. I'm 31 years old. I'm a dental hygienist. I drive a 7-year-old Civic with a cracked passenger mirror I've been meaning to fix since March. I rent a one-bedroom apartment in a city where that alone costs more than my parents think it does, and I have a rescue dog named Biscuit who expects dinner at exactly 5:15 every evening without exception. I've never missed it. Not once. I have a brother named Rory, 2 years older, louder in every room he enters, and somehow perpetually in between one thing and the next. His wife is named Candace. She smiles at me in a way that always makes me feel like I'm being assessed and coming up slightly short. My parents, Frank and Helen, raised us in a house where hard work was the language, and I was the one who translated it into money when it was needed. On paper, I look fine. Steady job, clean credit. I got my 401k started at 23 because nobody told me to, and I figured it out anyway. But there is a version of me that has been swallowing things for 12 years. The version who learned that being reliable was not a compliment in my family. It was an assignment. That version sat down at a wedding shower brunch this past April and did not stand back up the same person. I want to tell you exactly what happened. Rory got married 4 years ago to Candace, and from the first Thanksgiving onward, the math of every family gathering shifted in a way nobody named out loud. Suddenly, there were 2 households at the table instead of 1, and somehow I was still expected to cover the bill for 3. It started small. My mom called in February of my 27th year. Her voice was warm the way it gets when she needs something. "Nadia, your brother's shower for the new baby. We were thinking we'd do it at Rosewood Grill. You know, the one on 5th. They do that gorgeous mimosa brunch." I said okay. "Then we were thinking you could handle the reservation and maybe split the cost with us." I said okay. Then, 2 days before, we actually invited a few more of Candace's people, so it'll be closer to 16. But you know how to handle these things. You're so organized. I handled it. $1,200 split supposedly 3 ways, except my parents paid $400, and somehow Rory's contribution materialized as a Venmo request from me to him that he never fulfilled. I let it go. It was the baby shower. What was I going to do? By the time I counted, really sat down and counted, I had absorbed somewhere around $4,800 in 3 years across some things that never got named as loans. There was the time my parents' water heater died and they called me first. Not because I was closest, but because they knew I would say yes. There was the time Candace wanted a particular stroller that was, quote, on sale, and Rory texted me with that easy tone he uses when he's certain of the answer. "You're so good at finding deals. I found it. I bought it." It was $310. My ex, Marcus, used to say I treated my family like a subscription service I was too afraid to cancel. He wasn't wrong. We ended things about a year ago, amicably, genuinely, just 2 people who had grown in different directions and finally admitted it. He told me, the week before we moved out of our shared apartment, that he'd watched me pick up the phone for my brother in the middle of our anniversary dinner to walk him through disputing a credit card charge. He didn't say it angrily. He said it like someone describing a pattern they'd observed for too long and were sad to still be watching. My parents framed the breakup as a loss I should have prevented. Then in the same breath told me I was better off being independent for a while. They said both things in the same phone call without pausing. The invitation for Candace's baby shower, their second child, came 3 weeks after Marcus moved out. My mom called with that same honeyed voice. "We want to do something special. Rosewood is booked, but there's a new place, Harrington's. It's in the old mill building downtown. Very pretty, very her. And since you're so good at this kind of thing, I want to tell you what I did not say, which was, I don't want to." I said, "Let me look into it." What I should have done was ask what the budget was. Instead, I looked into it, found that Harrington's weekend brunch was $58 a head with a required minimum of $900 for private room booking, confirmed availability, sent a deposit from my own checking account for $300 to hold the date, and texted my mom the details. She replied, "Perfect, you're the best at this." Then, 3 hours later, Candace's mom is going to invite her book club ladies too, so we'll probably be closer to 20. "Is that okay with the room?" I said yes. I don't know why. Habit, probably. Or the thing that feels like love but is actually a fear of being the one who made things difficult. The shower was on a Saturday in April. Harrington's was beautiful in the way that places are when someone else would have appreciated it. Exposed brick, tall windows, small flower arrangements on every table. I'd handled the invitations, the balloons, the custom cookie order from a bakery. Candace had mentioned once in passing 6 months earlier because I'd written it down. I was the first one there. I set everything up. I smiled at every person who walked in. The problem started about 40 minutes in, when Candace's mother, a woman named Beverly who I had met exactly twice, sat down next to me and said, very pleasantly, that the lemon tart was just divine and she was so glad Candace had family who could pull something like this together. Then she said, "It must have been so much work on top of everything you're already dealing with." I said, "It was no problem." She said, "Candace mentioned you had a tough year, a breakup and all. It's nice that you had something to put your energy into." I want to be clear, she didn't mean it badly. That's the particular cruelty of it. She meant it as warmth. She thought she was being kind, and it still landed on me like a door closing on something I'd been hoping to keep open. I looked across the room at Rory, who was pouring himself a third mimosa and laughing at something on his phone, and at my mother, who was chatting with Candace's aunt and gesturing with both hands the way she does when she's performing belonging, and at Candace, who was opening gifts and saying, "Oh my gosh, I love it about everything," including the onesie set I had ordered from a small shop in Portland because she'd pinned it once on a board I'd looked up specifically. She didn't know it was from me. My mom had written all the tags. The moment that changed something came about an hour later. Candace's college friend, I want to say her name was something like Whitney, I had never met her before, was holding the gift list clipboard, making sure everything got recorded for thank you notes. She read off an item, looked up, and said, "Who got the milestone cards set?" My mom said without hesitation, "Oh, that was Rory and me. I had ordered them. I had paid for them. I had tracked the shipping when they were delayed and overnighted a replacement set at my own cost when the first package was marked delivered but never arrived." I didn't say anything. I watched my mother not say anything either. She moved on to the next item. She was smiling. It was the smile of someone who has never once considered that what just happened might matter to someone else in the room. After the gifts, there was cake. Harrington's had a small cake-cutting service for an added charge I'd absorbed without mentioning. While everyone ate, my mom appeared at my elbow and said very quietly, "The final count came in at 22, so it'll be a little over the minimum, which is fine, but the total will probably be around 1,500. I think we said we'd split it," I said. "We said thirds," she said. "Well, your father didn't budget for more than 250, and Rory said he'd get us back, so," I said. "So what?" she said. "I just thought you'd want to know ahead of time, so it's not a surprise." She patted my hand and went back to the cake table. I sat with that for about 4 minutes, I counted. I was watching my niece, the new baby's sister, Rory's daughter from a previous relationship, a 3-year-old named Lena, who I adore in the uncomplicated way you adore a child who has nothing to do with any of the adult nonsense around her. I was watching Lena try to pick up a strawberry from a fruit platter, and a server moved the platter without looking, and Lena's little hand grabbed air, and she looked at it with this expression of pure bewildered loss, like the world had simply reorganized itself without asking her. I thought, yes, exactly. I set down my fork. I found the event coordinator, a calm woman in a black apron named Tess, and I asked if I could separate my portion of the check. She said, "Of course, do you know what you had?" I said, "I'd like to itemize what I personally ordered and arranged, separate from the group tab." She said, "I can do that. Give me a few minutes." What I'd arranged personally in my name with my card. The room deposit. The balloon order, picked up that morning. The cookie boxes, 12 of them, custom, non-refundable. The milestone cards, including the overnight replacement. The cake service add-on. The 2 additional centerpieces I'd grabbed from a florist on my way over because the venue's flowers were sparse and I'd noticed. The coordinator came back with a folder. My total, separate from the food and drinks for 22 guests, was $748. I handed her my card. My mother found me at the gift table a few minutes later. She said, "Tess said you split off your tab. What did you order separately?" I said, "The things I organized." She said, "Nadia, you didn't need to make it a thing." I said, "I didn't make it a thing. I paid for what I did." She said, "Your brother is going to feel bad." I said, "Rory doesn't feel bad. I've been watching him not feel bad for 12 years. She went quiet with her jaw tight. The specific quiet she uses when she wants me to believe I've said something unforgivable. I've learned, slowly, that this quiet does not actually mean I've done something unforgivable. It means she doesn't have an answer, and she's waiting to see if I'll fill the silence for her like I usually do. I didn't fill it. Rory found me by the door when people started leaving. He said, "What was that about?" I said, "I'm not sure what you mean." He said, "Mom said you made a scene about the bill." I said, "I paid for what I arranged. That's not a scene," he said. "You always do this. You make everything into something." I looked at my brother. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, doing the thing he's always done, where he positions himself like the reasonable one, and waits for me to argue myself into looking unreasonable. I've been walking into that trap since we were teenagers, I said. I paid for the room deposit, the balloons, the cookie boxes, the milestone cards that I actually reordered overnight when the first set got lost, the cake add-on, and 2 extra centerpieces. Together that was $748. I paid it. That's what happened. He blinked. I don't think he knew about most of those things. I don't think he'd known about any of them, not because he was cruel about it, but because he genuinely never asked. I said, I love you and I love Candace and I already love this new baby. But I'm not the events coordinator for this family. I never agreed to be. He said, nobody asked you to be. I said, that's the thing, Rory. Nobody had to. I walked back in to say goodbye to Candace and hug Lena and tell my mother I'd call her during the week. She kissed my cheek with a little more pressure than usual, the way she does when she's registering a complaint without filing it out loud. My dad, who'd arrived late and left early and seemed largely unaware anything had happened, hugged me and said, good job with all this, sweetheart. Really nice, I said. Thank you, Dad. In my car, I sat for a few minutes before starting the engine. I had the windows down. April in our city smells like wet pavement and something almost green, and I just sat in it and let myself feel the particular feeling of having done something small that was actually enormous. My phone started going within the hour. A text from my mom. I hope you know that today was hard for Candace and she didn't need the extra stress. A text from Rory. Real mature. A text from Candace, which surprised me, which said, I heard there was some tension. Are you okay? I didn't know how to answer that one, so I set it aside. I went home. I fed Biscuit at 5:15 exactly. I made scrambled eggs and ate them standing at my kitchen counter because I didn't feel like sitting at the table alone. And then I sat on my couch and did something I'd been putting off for 8 months. I went through my Venmo history. I opened my email and found every confirmation from everything I'd ordered or paid for or organized that had somehow just become a given. The number was not small. I'm not going to say it here because it's not really about the number. It's about the pattern the number makes when you actually look at it. I made a list. I removed Rory from the family Spotify account, which I'd been paying for, which included his profile and Candace's. I checked the Amazon household account I'd added my mom to years ago for her birthday. I removed it. I found a recurring charge on my credit card for a subscription box I'd ordered for Rory's birthday 2 years ago and somehow never canceled. I canceled it. I slept better than I had in months. Monday, my mom called. She said, I want to talk about Saturday. I said, okay. She said, you embarrassed your brother at his wife's shower. I said, I paid for my portion of the event. That's all. She said, you made Candace uncomfortable on her day. I said, Candace texted me asking if I was okay. I don't think Candace is the one who's uncomfortable. Silence. She said, you know your brother doesn't have the same flexibility you do. I said, I know. She said, so sometimes we cover for each other. I said, I've been covering for 12 years, Mom. I'm not stopping because I love you any less. I'm stopping because I was disappearing. She said, that's very dramatic. I said, the milestone cards, the shower invitations, the cookie boxes, the centerpieces, the cake add-on, the overnight shipping when the first order got lost. Do you know Rory didn't know about any of those things? She was quiet. I said, his name was on the gift tag I didn't write. She said, I thought it would be easier. I said, easier for who? She didn't answer. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes talking around it, and then she said she had to go start dinner and she'd call me later in the week. She didn't sound angry anymore. She sounded tired, which is different and harder. Rory texted on Wednesday, no greeting, just Mom says you're doing some kind of reset. Is that what you're calling it? I typed out about 4 different responses. I sent 2 words, moving forward, he replied. So that's how it's going to be. I wrote yes. He didn't write back. I waited to feel worse about it than I did. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my dad's mother. My grandmother, a woman named Estelle who is 79 years old and plays bridge twice a week and has strong opinions about dill, called me on a Thursday evening and said, I heard there was a thing at the shower. I said, there was, She said, your mother told me you were difficult. I said, I separated my tab. She said, Then she said, you know, when your grandfather and I got married, his sister threw our rehearsal dinner. For years, every family gatherings, she'd bring it up some way. Never directly, just a little placement. Who organized what? Who paid? Who showed up? Your grandfather finally said to her one day, very quietly, we are grateful, but you cannot keep using gratitude as a leash. She paused. She said, I thought you might like to hear that story. I said, I really did. She said, come by this weekend. I made too much chicken and I want you to take some home, I went. She fed me and Biscuit. She pretended not to notice Biscuit on her kitchen floor eating chicken scraps. And we sat at her table for 3 hours and she told me about her own mother and her own sister and the particular shape that love takes in families that never learn to ask instead of assume. It was the most honest afternoon I'd had in a long time. Here's what I know now. I'm not angry at my brother. I'm not trying to punish my mother. Some part of me hopes that the quiet I've created will say something to them that my words never managed to. But I've stopped making that my project. What I am is clear. For the first time in a long time, I'm clear. Candace texted me again about a week after the shower. She said, I want you to know I didn't know you paid for all of that. Rory told me after. I should have asked. I'm sorry. I want to be better at this. I stared at that message for a while. Then I said, thank you for saying that. It meant a lot. She sent back a heart, just one. No performance attached to it. My niece Lena called me. Well, she FaceTimed me from Rory's phone, which she does sometimes when she finds it and knows how to find my name. And she held the camera too close to her face and said, Aunt Nadia, we got a bunny. I said, you did? She said, his name is Truck. I said, that's a great name. She said, I named him. I said, I know you did. She showed me Truck for approximately 9 minutes. He was gray and mostly indifferent to being held. It was one of the best phone calls I've had in recent memory. This is not a story about winning. I don't think there's a version of this where anyone wins. My family is still my family. They're frustrating and imperfect, and sometimes they look right at me and see only what I can provide for them, and that still hurts in the specific way that only people who are supposed to know you best can manage to hurt. But I'm not funding their blind spot anymore. I'm not organizing events and paying for things and swallowing the credit and calling it love. I'm not disappearing into the background of my own generosity. I turned 31 3 weeks after the shower. I booked a dinner reservation for myself and 2 friends at a nice restaurant downtown, the kind where the menu doesn't make me quietly do math in the background. I ordered what I wanted. I split the check evenly out loud with people who had already offered before I could ask. Nobody ordered anything to box up and take home to people who weren't there. We sat at that table for 3 hours. We closed the place down. And when I got home and unlocked my door and Biscuit came barreling at me with his whole body wagging, I sat down on the floor right there in the entryway and let him climb into my lap, and I thought, this is mine. This apartment, this dog, this quiet, this life I am building for myself in the spaces I used to fill up for everyone else. It's enough. More than enough. It's a start.